What is happening, superfans? You're listening to Behind the Mask, the show where we chat with your favorite superhero fiction authors about the worlds and heroes they are writing. Behind the Mask is brought to you in conjunction with the amazing folks over at superherofiction.com. I'm your host, Franklin Kendrick, and today on the show, we are pleased to be talking with author Samantha Bryant. Welcome to the
Hello.
podcast. So, first things first, the hardest question for Behind the Mask is, when you are not a superhero behind the keyboard, what is your secret identity out in the world?
The mild-mannered secret identity of Samantha Bryant is middle school Spanish teacher, which proves that I am braver than I look. Yeah, I live in a small town in North Carolina, and I teach in that same small town, 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, intro to Spanish, Spanish 1, that kind of stuff. And I'm also a mom to a 13-year-old and a 20-year-old. That 20-year-old's the scary one right now. And a geriatric dog.
No pressure, not a cakewalk, but So what got you into writing, and then what drew you to write in the superhero genre?
So I'm one of those people who almost can't remember not writing. I'd say my mom gets the most blame because she took me to the library and got me addicted to reading. And as everyone knows, reading is a gateway drug to writing. Start reading and you might start writing. It could happen to you.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And then my uncles probably didn't help because they're all readers as well. And they were always letting me read comic books that I probably wasn't old enough to read and that kind of thing. So starting with reading. And then when I was in first grade, I had this wonderful teacher, Mrs. Osdorf. And what I remember about Mrs. Osdorf is that she was not much taller than the first graders. She would walk past my desk and it would feel like she was at my eye level. But she gave us an assignment where we were copying poems. It was basically just to learn handwriting, to try to learn to write legibly. We were copying poems. But I really liked the poems. And I would talk to her about the poems. And I was especially fond of Emily Dickinson. And then one day in class, she just leaned down by my desk and she said, Samantha, if you want to, you could write your own poems. And, then I was like, what?
It's like an amazing doorway. I feel like when you're a kid, it's like, oh my gosh, it's like mythical books and stuff that you're given, and then it's like somebody actually wrote this.
It's funny how you can read for a long time as a kid and it never really occurs to you that anybody made those books, that they didn't just exist somehow without a creator. Bookmobile ladies were giving me books and I never thought about who made them. But superhero in particular was kind of funny because, ever since I was 6, I've always written something. What has varied? It was like poetry when I was a kid, more literary fiction when I was an undergrad, and that kind of thing. But there's another writer here in Hillsborough, North Carolina named James Maxey. And he and I have become friends. And I met him through my library. He was running some writing workshop kinds of classes, information about self-publishing and how to write, just kind of craft sorts of classes. And I took a couple of his classes trying to find my own discipline and get myself started. And one of his books is called Nobody Gets the Girl. And it's a superhero novel. And although I'd been a fan of superheroes my whole life, I had never heard of superhero novels. This idea that there was prose versions, not comic book, not TV, not movies, but a novel that was about superheroes. And I thought, that's amazing. That's totally what I want to write. And so I did. So I guess it's my mom's fault, Mrs. Osdorf's fault, and James Maxey's fault.
It's a great conspiracy. And it's such an easy, it always starts out as I'll just do it a little bit. I'll just dabble with it. But then it totally just takes over.
Oh yeah, for sure. I used to say that I was a teacher who writes. Now I think I'm a writer who teaches. If you look at where my passion lies and where I would prefer to give the bulk of my time, writing's got the top spot right now. And I still love teaching, but I've been a professional teacher for oh dear, how old am I now? About 25 years. And I've been a professional writer for 5. So it's a little newer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They both have their ups and downs. They're both, I'd say they both have their like unexpected good points and then like, oh no, frustrating points. But at least at the writing,
I always
you're
say
like,
my husband funds my nasty teaching habit.
true, yeah.
Because, it's not anything you're going to get public praise or a living wage for doing.
It's true. So what, tell me about your book series. How many books are out? How many do you have books planned? Is it ongoing?
So my series is called the Menopausal Superhero series, which I think the title gives you a good idea what's going on there. That this time, instead of it being teenagers who are getting superpowers, it's women. The way I put it is it's women of experience, because that sounds so much nicer than it's old ladies. But the menopausal superheroes are all women who are going through menopause, who all used products that turned out to be made by the same probably mad scientist and had unexpected side effects. So the first book is called Going Through the Change. And the change in this case is both menopause and dealing with sudden superpowers. And then there's a second novel, Face the Change. And a third, oh, I got it backwards. My second novel is Change of Life. The third novel is Face the Change, which I love the cover on the third novel. Isn't that pretty?
Oh my gosh, yes.
Yeah. I love all my covers, but I think of the novels, this one's my favorite for the cover. So those are the 3 novels right now, and there's 2 more novels upcoming. I'm contracted to do the 4th one in 2021 and the 5th one in 2022. And then in the meantime, I've also been doing some novellas. So this year we released Friend or Foe, which is a novella that fits right in between book 1 and book 2, and The Goodwill Tour, which fits right in between book 2 and book 3. And then in August, we're releasing a collection of short stories. We're arguing about what the title should be right now, me and the publishers.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, but that'll come out in late August. Because I had an interesting publishing story, which this probably isn't the place to talk about it in detail, but I had been published by one publisher that folded and then picked up by another publisher. So there's been some rebranding and releasing of my older work, and then getting back on track to start releasing new work again. Cool. But yeah, that's my idea, the Menopausal Superhero series.
So if you had to pitch it, it would be the Golden Girls meets the Avengers.
That's pretty good. Although they're mostly younger than the Golden Girls.
Not as old as the Golden Girls, but
yeah, my youngest character of the heroes anyway is Jessica, and she's only 32. But she went through menopause early because she's a cancer survivor. She survived ovarian cancer and ended up with superpowers thanks to our mad scientist. And then the oldest character is the mad scientist herself, and in the first book, she's 67. So we got a little bit of a range.
Not bad.
Yeah.
What for your heroes, what is their dynamic like? Are they like a team, or are they all against each other? How do they come together?
So in the first book, there's only 2 characters that knew each other. Like on page 1, they already knew each other. And that would be Patricia, who comes to be known as the Lizard Woman of Springfield, and Cindy Lou, the scientist who created all the products. And they've been friends for like 40 years. They met when they were undergrads, and now they're both retired. So they've been friends forever. So they knew each other. The other women just kind of coincidentally live in the same town, and they end up finding each other through, they had these side effects and are trying to figure out what's happening, and they get brought together that way. So you've got your main heroes are Patricia, the Lizard Woman of Springfield, and Jessica, also known as Fly Girl. She's the cancer survivor, and from her name, you can probably guess that she flies. Mm-hmm. And then you've got Helen, who likes to call herself Flamethrower, Her hot flashes got kind of literal.
Oh boy.
So, yeah, she could flash you with this heat instead of just herself. And then the crowd favorite is Linda, or Leonel Alvarez, also known as Fuerte. And Linda probably had the biggest change. On page 1 of the first book, she's a 48-year-old Latina grandmother. And by page 4 of the book, she's a man.
Oh.
Yeah. One of her side effects, she's fuerte, which means strength in Spanish. So she's got super strength, but she's also had the unexpected gender change. And that's been very interesting to write about, like a trans character who didn't think of themselves as another gender ever. It's something that kind of happened to them, and then they had to deal with the transformation. I liked Linda, and I like Leonel, and there's still a lot of fun to write these characters.
I would imagine there's a lot of humor in. Suddenly, there's already kind of like humor in
the concept.
Like, in discovering you have powers of some sort, but then like sometimes it's like, oh, it's hilarious to be like, oh, these aren't the powers that you expected you would get. You still have to learn how to live with them.
Yeah, I've described the tone of these as kind of dramedy, because they're not laugh-a-minute comedies.
No.
But there's definitely a lot of humor in the situations, and some of the things that happen to the characters, you're like groaning and laughing at the same time when you read about it. Yeah. And there's a lot of themes of friendship among women, and about some of the specific kinds of problems that women face in society. Direct misogyny, and also just casual sexism. And given that a lot of these women are older, ageism is a big theme in the book as well, which is not to say that they're pedantic or preachy, because I really try not to be. It's more just, the women who got the powers this time are not 17. So the way having powers affects their lives is way different. They have children and partners and jobs and retirement accounts, and, they can't just skip chemistry class to go figure out how to manage their new powers.
Yeah, they're not, their day-to-day life is different than a young teen protagonist. It's like their obligations are totally different.
Yeah, I think that's kind of where the series started for me, is actually my husband and I had just watched one of the X-Men movies, and I honestly don't remember which X-Men movie it was, but we were walking around talking about it afterwards, and my husband joked that the message of the movie was that with puberty comes superpowers.
Yeah.
And I said, well, if that's the case, I mean, if hormones cause superpowers, then menopausal women have got the corner on that market. And he thought it was a hilarious idea. He goes, write that down. And so I did. And, here we are 5 going on 7 books later.
Wow. I think that is like a very interesting twist on the genre that I've never really seen before. And it is like a very creative way of like definitely addressing some of the themes that you mentioned, that it's like we want to see those themes, but we just don't want to see the themes like dressed on what we already have seen a million times. Right. So it's like the characters are different, but I mean, it would be hilarious to be like, oh, hey, Aunt May has the powers instead of like the young whippersnapper kid. And it's like, yeah, you would use those powers totally. Your priorities are way different than somebody who is like, I'm going to impress the girl. It's like, at this point in our lives, what are we going to use these for?
Right. And I definitely went with my heroes were not like instantly comfortable and good at managing their new abilities. At one point, Jessica says that, yeah, sure, everybody else got powers. I got a disability, because she was trying to learn how to fly, and she was terrible at it. She couldn't control her movement at all. She was like an untethered balloon. So it didn't feel like, wow, look at this cool new thing I've got. It's like, look at this new problem I've got.
Yeah. Oh boy. So the world that they live in, is it our world? Is it an alternate world? What type of setting do these characters live in?
I've used a pretty realistic, pretty contemporary setting. I made up a city, Springfield, and I chose Springfield because when I was doing a little, first off, because I like The Simpsons, and
Yeah.
second, because Springfield is a really common city name in the United States. Like
Mhm.
nearly every state has a Springfield.
Yeah.
And it's non-specifically mid-sized cities, someplace fairly near where I live. And I live in Hillsborough, North Carolina, so kind of a southern city. Some of the places they end up going, like they end up in Indiana, they end up in Baltimore. They're talking about things happening in Georgia, but Springfield itself is never specifically placed. Like, where exactly is it? I think it may be in a state that doesn't exist, like East Virginia or something.
Yeah.
But it's the world is pretty realistic, other than the addition of superpowers, and it's a world where superpowers were not already unknown at they know about superheroes as a concept. That's something that always annoyed me, is in a lot of fantasy novels, nobody in the fantasy novel has ever read a fantasy novel. Nobody's,
they're not self-aware of what's
right. They
going
encounter
on.
a vampire and it's like they have no concept of what a vampire might be. And I'm like, how could you live this long and not have some concept of what at least you think a vampire would be like?
Mm-hmm.
So the characters in my novel, have seen movies and read books, and Patricia's a big comic book fan. So they're aware of superheroes as a concept, but it's a fictional concept in their world, much as it is, so far as I know, in our world.
Yeah. So it's like they've obviously like lived through some of the like various golden ages
Right. Yeah.
of the characters. This one's not on my list, but what do they use their powers for? Do they become crime fighters, or what do they do with the powers once they start like harnessing them?
So starting out, they're just looking for answers for themselves and trying to figure out what happened to them, and they kind of get brought together through that. But it doesn't take very long for them to attract the attention of a shadowy organization, calls itself the Department. Not the Department of anything, just the Department.
Yeah.
And by the third book, they've been, at least some of the characters have been recruited into an organization called the UCU, or Unusual Cases Unit, and are starting to work something maybe akin to like S.H.I.E.L.D. in the Marvel universe, but not quite that widespread. We're not, it's more like, it's set in Springfield. So the UCU is something in Springfield. And they might go a little further afield dealing with things that came up in Springfield, but they're not going to be going up to their space station like the Justice League to take care of the whole planet. It's smaller scale than that.
I like that. It's like, it doesn't always have to be like a giant world-ending thing to be a big deal. And it doesn't make sense that like a secret organization would not want to plop itself right in the middle of like a gigantic metropolitan area.
Right. That's kind of one of the things I have fun with, is that it's a mid-sized city, maybe along the size of Raleigh or Durham, which are the two larger cities near me. They're not that large. They don't compare to like Chicago or New York City or even San Diego. They're quite small in comparison, but they're still a city, and they still have an infrastructure, and they still have enough crime for my superheroes to help with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool. I grew up in a small town, so I'm like imagining like, yeah, what would it be like if all of a sudden my next door neighbors were like, hey, yeah, I can fly around now. That would like change the whole place, for at least for a little bit, until people got used to it. But
right. And in the UCU, when I introduce it there, they've been a secret organization, and they don't have any like big powered people like these heroes, but they have people who have small skills, like people who are maybe a little bit psychic and can influence your thinking, or they have people who are especially good with machines or amazingly dexterous, but they're not like actually super powered, like, Fuerte, who could pick up a car and throw it for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where do you want this?
Like, I'll move those things for you. So what kind of what kind of stories or like it could be movies or comics or whatever, what kind of things inspired you to write your own superheroes?
So the superheroes I grew up on were like Spider-Man was one of my early favorites. And one of the things that I really loved about Spider-Man was how ordinary Peter Parker was. You know, that he was just a smart, not popular kid, not particularly socially adept. And he, you know, when he got his powers, he didn't make the best decisions with them instantly. So he felt very real to me. And I like that approach of where the Peter Parker is the real character and Spider-Man is his public persona, and not the other way around for the most part. So, you know, I consider when I talk about my heroes, they have superhero names now that they are associated with an organization. But, you know, on the page, a lot of times it doesn't say Fly Girl. It says Jessica, because primarily she's Jessica. So I started with, you know, definitely the influence of Marvel heroes in particular, but lots of different comic book kinds of things. And I have a great time playing around with all of the power sets and themes and giving them a new twist. And then since I started with the idea of menopausal superheroes, a lot of it also sprang from thinking about menopause and thinking about what kind of symptoms people have and how could that manifest as a power. And so like hot flashes into fire, that one seemed pretty obvious.
Yeah.
And like Jessica learning to fly, it comes because she's depressed, having survived ovarian cancer and her marriage is in trouble. She's in a sad place. And so she's drinking this tea that's supposed to lighten her mood, and instead it lightens her.
Yeah.
Like literally. You know, and Leonel was using, or Linda at the time was using a soap that's supposed to energize you, and its secret ingredient is testosterone, which is actually a thing, that there are like soaps and products that have a little testosterone in it because it's supposed to kind of be an energy boosting kind of thing. But, you know, it had some unexpected effects on her. So I, you know, started with those kinds of things. And, you know, I'm a kid from the 70s. So I was born in 1971. So I grew up on a lot of 70s heroic women. Like some of the earliest television I can remember watching with my dad was like Wonder Woman, Bionic Woman, Jamie Summers. Yes.
Oh my gosh, Bionic Woman, yes.
Yeah, and Charlie's Angels. And so there's a lot of that influence. And, you know, one thing I had fun with is as I was making these characters, really paying attention to when each one of them was born and what their points of reference would be. Because I think that's always a danger as a writer, is to reference everything that's about the same age as you and forget that some of your characters are older than you or younger than you, and they wouldn't make the same references. So it's been fun for me to, you know, have characters who are as much as 20 years older than me and as much as 20 years younger than me, and look at how that changes their points of reference. And then so far as superhero prose itself, I already told you about starting with James Maxey and Nobody Gets the Girl. But I also, right after that, I found a book called, let me think of the title, Broken, Susan Jane Bigelow. And that one was interesting because the hero is broken in an emotional kind of sense. And so this was one of the first stories I saw that dealt with, what if the person who got the powers is a good guy, but they don't have it together. And so they don't always use it well. They might hurt somebody because it's an accident, that they overreact because they have a lot of stress and that kind of thing. So I was really influenced by that book. And then for humor, I love Gwenda Bond's Lois Lane series.
Oh yeah.
And I really liked the X series by Peter Klein for just huge variety of powers and for managing an ensemble cast. That's a great series.
I have not seen that one, but I will probably look
They're
it
all
up
called
after
X
this.
something, like X Heroes, X. Gosh, I'm terrible with the titles, but Peter Klein is the author's name. That would be enough to help you find him.
Yes. Yeah, I have to say, I definitely love the theme of character. I mean, I think part of the charm of like the average characters getting powers, because sometimes they're not average characters, but the ones that I've remembered the most and followed the most are the ones that they're like an average person because it's like you're supposed to see yourself to some capacity as the character, but then it's like the question of like you get these powers, do they change your life for the better? They could also change your life for the worse, depending on like what you allow it to do to you.
Right.
So,
And also what you decide to use them for. Are you going to try to use them for just personal gain
mhm,
on a small scale or a big scale? If it's a big scale, you're probably now a supervillain. If it's a
mhm,
small
yeah,
scale, you're a capitalist.
yeah,
You know, and Patricia is my favorite character for that because I have a real soft spot for reluctant hero kinds of characters. Like
mhm,
Logan or Wolverine is one of my favorite superhero characters ever, and Patricia in some ways is an homage to him in that she's so prickly, so back off, Jack. I don't have to
mhm,
do anything for you. And
yeah.
it's clear throughout the story that the reason she's got this shell is because she's a marshmallow and she cares about everything. And
Oh
she's kind
yeah.
of built all these walls to protect herself from herself. And
Mhm.
you could argue with me about it, but I think that's true of Logan as well. Yeah, as evidenced by the number of young women that he keeps ending up mentoring and trying to help across all of his comic book stories.
Oh yeah, it's
Yeah.
like the steely like I don't care that much about you. You can go do what you want, but it's like they're just trying to not get so attached where it's like, oh, they're going to eventually leave or something bad will happen. And
Right. People keep getting hurt. And so you keep saying, like, okay, I'm not going to engage then. That way I can't be hurt the next time. But,
yeah,
they care too much to actually not get pulled in again.
yeah, they have the
Yeah.
heart of gold, and it eventually comes out somehow.
Yes.
I like that. All right, let me see. What else do I got here? So I guess without spoilers, you can spoil if you want, because I have had some people spoil a little bit. This is kind of like a two-part question. Do you have a favorite plot line from your books that you've written? And also, do you have a plot line that surprised you when you discovered it?
So the answer to both of those is the same plot line, actually. I think that's part of why I like writing. I'm definitely a discovery writer, or some people call it a pantser, where
Mhm.
you don't sit down with the whole thing formed in your head and you're just trying to get it on the page. I sit down and start writing to find out what the story is going to be. So in the first draft, at least, I'm learning the story as I write it.
Mhm.
And Patricia, the lizard woman of Springfield, she's got my favorite character arc because she's so awful in the first book. Like she's so mean to everybody, and she makes such bad decisions just because she won't listen. And that's um, it's a thing you see commonly with male characters in books, but not something you see too often with female characters. Because you'll hear female authors talk about this all the time about the trouble of everybody expecting that if your characters are female, they have to be likable.
Mhm.
And some of mine are likable, and some of them are not. And in the
Yeah,
first book, I would
true
say
to
Patricia's
life.
definitely on the less likable side.
Mhm.
Um, so watching her admit that she needs people and watching her develop relationships with people, especially people that she judged really harshly at the outset. And there's a young woman in the book, not a superpowered person. Her name is Susie Grayson. And she comes into the story as Patricia's intern, not in a super heroic sense, but just at the office. Like
Mhm.
Patricia is a vice president in corporate, vice president of marketing in some corporate. I don't even remember what I named the company because it wasn't important to me. But Susie comes in as her intern, and Patricia's awful to her because she doesn't want an intern, and she has no patience with what she considers young, frivolous women. And Susie's tiny and cute, And so that makes it even worse. Like she's 26 years old, 5 foot tall, tiny little blonde. Patricia's worst nightmare. She's like, get away. And, but, across the books, they become really, really close. And I can't say too much without giving things away, but there's a twist to their relationship that I didn't see coming, but my critique partners did. When it came out, they were like, well, it's about time. So I thought that was funny that, she'd gotten across to some of my readers before she got across to me.
Yeah, I do partial, I feel like I do half outline, half creative writing. And it depends on the story. Like sometimes I just start because something comes to me and then I'll outline the remainder of the book after I get so far. And sometimes I start with like a half outline of the beginning and then I'm like, I'll figure it out when I get to the end as I see everything. So it's kind of fun that, your readers are kind of like doing the same process as you, where it's like they're also looking ahead and they're looking at all the hints. And like, I think I told somebody else said it, but I ended up telling some other writers this quote because we were lamenting like, I feel like I should know all the answers and I feel like I should have my whole thing planned out. And it was like, really, sometimes you can't hold the whole entire story with all the plot twists and all of the revelations in your head, because your imagination is like figuring it out as you go along. Like you're the first reader, and it's like it's entertaining you. And I like the whole like being surprised by things that you were like, I would have never even thought of that if I had outlined this on paper before I started. So I think that's really cool.
It feels like time travel, doesn't it? Like, Topaz, hey, you're so smart. How did you come up with that?
Yeah, I think one of the other cool things is when you're like halfway done reading some of what you've written and being like, oh, and you can sort of like spot the stuff where you're like, oh, I haven't answered that yet. So it's kind of like, oh, cool. There's still so much to wrap up. And then there's also things that you leave as like, I'm not going to answer that this time. They're going to wait for that next thing.
Right. Well, there's always so much more story that can be told, even when you're writing something as big and full as a novel versus a short story, there's more story than fits in those pages. So there's always something you didn't give us a lot of detail about and could go back for. That's I'm in an interesting spot because I'm writing the 4th of the Menopausal Superhero novels right now. And it's been 2 years since I've written new things for this universe. Because I mentioned before, I switched from one publisher to another, and my contract said that first publisher could have all of this work, and I wasn't giving them any anymore. So I didn't write any. So what I've been doing the past couple of weeks is actually reading my own books again, just to immerse myself back in the world and to see what all kinds of threads did I leave hanging. After 2 years of writing other things in the meantime, I don't actually remember. I have to, not in detail anyway. Like, of course I remember my general universe and my characters, but not exactly which little plot threads did I leave hanging that I could go back and do something with. Yeah.
That's really cool. And I'm glad that the people that picked up your previous publisher, I'm glad that they weren't like, okay, we're not doing anymore, because they could have been like, no, like, please, I want to know what happens next.
Yeah, and I was glad to be able to move to another publisher. I know a lot of people have a lot of success as indie authors and self-publishing, but I do this part-time alongside teaching and momming, and I just don't feel like I have enough hours in the day to develop all those additional skills that you need if you're going to be your own publisher. And so, at least at this stage of my career, I really value having a traditional, separate of me publisher. For the help,
Yeah, it's a lot of hats to wear, and it's like if you're already wearing a lot of hats in your own real life, it's like, oh my gosh.
Right, like yes, I need an editor, so my publisher assigned me one. I didn't have to go shopping for one and figure out which one's good. He did that.
Yeah,
he just told Teresa to make my books better, and she has.
Nice.
Yeah.
So for the novellas, are those Are those something that you had planned all along to go in between, or is this one that you came up with like afterwards as just like an extra bit of story?
Um, when I initially, I don't think I had them in mind at the very outset, but also when I wrote the first book, I didn't know it was going to be a series. Like I
Hmm.
really thought I was writing a book, just
Yeah.
one. So, I think my whole process has been a little more discovery writer than that. I didn't have this specific plan, but the novellas came up because of just opportunities. Like
Hmm.
once my first publisher asked me for a novella because they were doing an anthology of novellas. So like it's a
Oh, cool.
giant book. The book is a tome because it has like 7 novellas in it, or was it 10? I don't remember. Anyway, there's a lot.
Yeah.
Um, and they asked me to write one for that. And so I did. And I really liked writing a novella. That's a real comfortable length. I liked how it had more to it than a short story, but didn't take me as long to create as a novel. So it's a length I really like.
Hmm.
And then the second novella was written for a charity anthology that ended up
Oh,
not coming
cool.
out. Like they had good intentions, but as it is with a lot of small projects, somebody got sick and
Hmm.
that was it, because there's basically one person behind it. And if their life goes messy in some way, the project gets dropped. So then I
Yeah.
had this novella I'd written that didn't have a home. And when my new publisher and I were talking about how to keep the series alive with this gap, we talked about releasing the novellas so that there's new material being released while I'm
Hmm.
working on the next novel. And I think it's been brilliant. And I just think these books are so cute. Like, look how little these
I
are.
love the covers, and I do think because sometimes, well, I mean, it depends on the audience that you're courting, but I
Mhm.
feel like sometimes it doesn't really matter the age. Sometimes I just want something that's not going to take me a super long time to read, where it's like, oh, thank
Right,
goodness, I can see the page numbers are under 150. Like this will
right.
be great. Like,
Right. I know during quarantine, for a while I struggled to read it all. Like,
mhm,
just the low level anxiety and the stress of what exactly is my life going to be, and worrying about my students and my family and everything. Struggled to read. And I found that what worked for me is I read a lot of novellas in the past
mhm,
couple of months. Just, books that I can read in a single sitting.
mhm.
So I can, shut
Yeah.
myself away for a couple of hours and have a complete story and feel really good about having read that. And it doesn't have the stress of taking on, the Lord of the Rings again or something.
Oh yeah. Even with audio, I feel like so far this quarantine, it's been like I picked up like a ebook of like Ray Bradbury short stories,
Oh,
and it
he
was
would be
like
great. Yeah.
it was
It's been a while since I've read some Ray Bradbury, but he would be great right now.
oh yeah, and just getting like I mean, like you said, it's like just being able to get the satisfaction of reaching an ending. It
Hmm.
was like, oh my gosh, like I had like maybe five like 300 and up pages books that I have been reading previously that were like in various stages of being finished. And it was like, oh, I just needed to feel like, oh, I got a complete thing, and it didn't take me this whole quarantine to finish reading one book.
I also found that I reached for a lot more purely escapist works.
Mhm.
Like I read, silly like alien romances,
Oh
and
yeah.
just anything that was going to entertain me. And the less relationship it had to my life, the happier I felt at that moment. I definitely was after pure escapism.
Yep.
And it's after, now that we've been doing this for like 4 months, I've adapted. I don't know if I'm feeling less stress or if I've just adapted to the new levels of stress.
Yeah. It's
But
hard. It's hard to know.
yeah. So I'm finding that I can read the variety that I always used to read. And so I the reason I brought up the Lord of the Rings, because I just finished The Hobbit again this morning.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
It's such comfort food. It's like
Isn't
the
it?
story. Like there's a reason we keep the books that we love in like whatever. I've dragged around the same hardcovers of stuff I read when I was in high school, just because it's like I always go back to it, and it never really gets old.
Mhm.
All right, let me see. What do I got? I don't have a whole lot of questions left. I'm kind of like veering off in like random questions that come to my mind. Um, uh, okay. For your series, you said you have 2 more books planned.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how much you're able to tease, but are you able to, for anybody who is either thinking of starting or is already a reader of your series, can you hint at anything they might possibly expect in the next 1 or 2?
So if you'd read the third novel, there's a character called the Director that you're probably feeling pretty darn curious about because of the way the book ended. And I can expect that you will learn a great deal more about him in the 4th book.
Ooh. Sounds very ominous.
I can't really give any hints that wouldn't give it away for somebody who hasn't read it yet.
Yeah.
But he was an interesting character, talking about surprises, like, where did he come from? When I was starting to write it, he was not what I expected at all. And I'm looking forward to filling in his story of who exactly he is and how he does what he does.
That sounds, the name alone is like, ooh, I do want to know more.
Yeah, it's one of the things about the department is how they refuse to give anything a really direct name. Like they call themselves the department, and he's called the Director. Yeah, obviously he's a person. He should have a name, but nobody knows what it is.
Yeah, it sounds like one of those like.
Fury look like he's not paranoid.
Sounds like one of those like scary things where they call you and they're like, here's your case number, and you're like, wait, what? No, what is this? I don't even own a printer. No. Very cool. So I guess if you have anything else that you want listeners to know before I wrap everything up, I can give you a chance to say whatever.
Okay, so the new release that's coming out in August is going to be a collection of short stories, and I'm really pretty excited about these because they gave me a chance to explore little parts. We were talking earlier about all the threads that you don't necessarily pick back up in the novel. So I got to go back for some things that I didn't get to explore fully. And so there's one of the stories is called Coming Out as Leonel. And, Leonel is the character who changed from Linda to Leonel and got super strength. And they live in a really close-knit neighborhood and couldn't figure out how to keep their social life and what to tell their family. Yeah. So they're married, to a man, and I guess mild spoiler, they stay married. But that particular story is about their group of neighborhood friends kind of coming to terms with what happened. And that was just great fun to imagine because, imagine like you wake up tomorrow and you appear to be somebody entirely different. And you've got to convince somebody you're you.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, somebody to tell you, right? So it's a lot of that, like, tell me something only Linda would know, and and the weirdness of that, even skipping the superpowers part, just you're not Linda, you're some guy,
Oh, that's so terrifying.
Yeah, so I really enjoyed writing that story, and it's one that I love for the personal relationships. I guess I'm fond of the domestic front of superhero stories, that I like to see. I love to see them kick butt and use their powers against, horrible evil. But I also really love to see just powerful people dealing with their regular life and how their hero work affects all those relationships. So I'm looking forward to people getting to read that one. And there's if you like the romance side, I've got kind of a romance story in there, Fly Girl's Second Chance. Because her first marriage was on the rocks when the first book began. And so here, a little later in the series, she's divorced and considering remarrying. And that story I thought was really nice for showing a hero who has family support. Like, one of my least favorite superhero tropes is the idea that if you choose a heroic life, it means you choose a lonely one, that you're never allowed to have a partner and a family or a dog or anything. And that's something I try to undercut in my books, is that they're going to live a heroic life and they're going to have their complete social networks around them.
That's awesome. Yeah, you don't have to have your superheroes be terrified all the time of being exposed and targeted.
To have a secret identity. She's like, whatever.
Oh.
It's like, I'm bulletproof, dude.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, eventually you're just like, you people are going to know about me and you're going to accept it, or you're not going to accept it.
Right. And if you think you can take me, come at me, bro. That's, that's her attitude.
Yeah. It's like, you may go down with a butt whooping.
Yeah.
Very awesome. Well, so where, to close it out, where can readers find your stuff?
So my website is my name, SamanthaBryant.com. That should make it pretty easy. And on my website, there's a tab called Read My Work, which will give you a little bit about each of my menopausal superhero books and also other writing I've done, other speculative fiction, and links over to places where you can buy it. My publisher is Falstaff Books, and so you can go to their site directly and order from their Square store if you would like, if you're interested in the books. And if you're interested in connecting on social media, the ones I play on the most are Facebook, where I'm Samantha Dunaway Bryant, because there was already a Samantha Bryant. So you get my Dunaway too. Plus also some of my Facebook people have known me longer than I've been named Bryant.
Okay.
Yeah. And then on Twitter and on Instagram, I'm at Samantha B Writer. So Samantha, the letter B, and then the word writer, which I thought was kind of punny. Like, Samantha B Writer. Such good grammar I have. And I've just started to play around on YouTube, doing some, I was telling you earlier that I got a green screen and a ring light and everything. I'm joining the 21st century at last.
Yeah, everything is video now. It's like, you just got to do it. You just got to jump in.
My daughters are trying to teach me to avoid that old lady thing of not looking like you know where the camera is.
You have to put like a little smiley face sticker like right above and be like, that's the face. It's the face of all the people out there.
If I record on my laptop, it's a little better because the image of us on my screen is not that far below the camera. So even if I look at the picture of you, I don't look too far off of actually looking like I'm looking into the camera.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
But yeah, that's definitely a skill that comes a little more naturally to people younger than me.
Well, you can always, it's always a work in progress, even for the ones that are doing it.
What's the fun if you're not learning anything new?
I know, now everybody is forced to do it now, so it's like,
yeah, for sure.
We'll see. It's a competition. So I have to say, thank you very much for being on. It was very nice chatting.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's always good to get to talk writing with, writing people.
Yes. Yeah. So I'll do my little wrap-up spiel for the listeners out there. Just want to let you guys know that if you enjoy the content of our podcast, and whether you're watching it on YouTube or listening to it on a podcast app, please make sure you subscribe so that you don't miss out on anything in the future. There's a lot more to come. Make sure you hit the like button, ring the bell if you want to get notifications. If you're able to comment, feel free. If you discuss the books that we talked about, if you're going to do spoilers, please just put a spoiler tag for those who haven't read and want to read. It's always appreciated. So with that said, as always, everybody, thank you very much for tuning in. I appreciate you all, whether you're new or old to the podcast, and I will see you guys next time.